Counting the days of the Hebrew New Year. Daniel 12:4. But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Knowledge shall be increased. In these latter days, the Most High God Yah has blessed the seed of Jacob to give us access to more of the Scriptures and further understanding. Knowledge has definitely been increased. The counting of the Hebrew year is shown in the canonized Bible, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Dead Sea Scrolls, Zadok, priestly calendar, and the Apocrypha. Yah has given us the heavenly bodies as witnesses and signs to begin the counts of his holy days. Let us read some of these accounts. Yah's annual holy days. Spring holy days include Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost. The autumn holy days include trumpets, Day of Atonement, and tabernacles. Understanding Abib, the beginning of the year. Abib is the name of the first month of the year. Exodus 12:1. And Yah spake unto Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Deuteronomy 16:1. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto Yah, thy Elohim. For in the month of Abib, Yah, thy Elohim, brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Understanding Abib, the beginning of the year. The tools given to mankind for the counting of time are called the lights in the firmament. These lights, the sun, the moon, and the stars, were created on the fourth day of the creation week. Genesis 1:14, 16, and 19. And Yah said, Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years. And Yah made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. The Hebrew New Year begins on the fourth day, that being Wednesday, that follows the spring equinox. The annual sign shown by the sun is the spring equinox. It occurs once a year and marks the upcoming change of seasons into spring. The equinox is a sign and does not mark the new year. The new year occurs after the sign. The new year begins on the fourth day of the week, on the day that the sun, moon, and stars were created. And once again, Genesis 1:14, let them, the lights, be for signs and for seasons and for days and years on the fourth day. Although the moon is important as one of the signs of times, it is not the primary sign. The sun is the primary sign. Genesis 1:16 reminds us that the sun is the greater light. The moon's role in the calendar takes place twice a year. The moon announces the upcoming spring and autumn seasons, the two seasons of Yah's annual holy days. But the beginning of the year is determined by the sun, because the sun is the greater light. The book of Jubilees, chapter 2, really makes this clear. Verse 8, On the fourth day, he, Yah, created the sun and the moon and the stars. Elohim appointed the sun to be a great sign on the earth, for days, and for Sabbaths, and for months, and for feasts, and for years, and for all seasons of the years. We first determine our calendar by the signs of the sun. The sun is the greater light. The greater light, the sun, is the main sign that we must use to determine our holy days. Israeli scholars promote the use of a lunar calendar. This is incorrect. The scriptures teach only of a 12-month calendar, not a 13-month lunar calendar. The true calendar is based on all three heavenly witnesses, the sun, the moon, and the stars. The greater sign of the three, however, is the sun, not the moon. Jubilees 2:36. For there will be those who assuredly make observations of the moon, and how it disturbs the season. For this reason they disturb, misinterpret the order, and make an abominable day the day of testimony, and an unclean day a feast day. And they will confound all the days, for they will go wrong as to the months and the Sabbaths and the feasts. Enoch 72:12 states, And the moon falls behind the sun and the stars, and the sun and the stars bring in the years exactly. The moon is not the primary sign. Here's a series of sunset photos of the same location taken at sunset, but at different times of the year. As you see, each month shows the sun at a different position. Throughout the year, the days become longer in the summer season and shorter in the winter season. Yah's scriptures explain these movements. Let's read. Enoch 72, verse 1. The book of the courses of the luminaries of the heaven, according to their months which Uriel, the holy angel, showed me, all their laws exactly as they are, and unto eternity, till the new creation is accomplished. And this is the first law of the luminaries. The luminary, the sun, has its rising in the eastern portals of the heaven, and its setting in the western portals of the heaven. And first there goes forth the great luminary named the sun. Enoch 72, verse 5. This portion discusses the path of the sun, starting in the springtime at the vernal equinox. The chariot on which he, the sun, ascends, the wind drives, and the sun goes down from the heaven and returns. He rises in the first month in the great portal. He comes forth 30 mornings in succession. And during this period, the day becomes daily longer and the night nightly shorter, to the 30th morning, and the sun rises from that portal. Enoch chapter 72, verse 14 begins the summer season, which of course lasts for 3 months. Verse 14 states, The sun rises and sets in the 6th portal 1:30 mornings on account of its sign, that sign being the summer solstice. On that day, the day becomes double the night. And the sun returns to the east and returns into the 6th portal and rises from it and sets 30 mornings, and the day decreases. And the sun rises in the 5th portal for 30 mornings and sets in the 5th western portal, and on that day the day decreases. Each season follows a pattern of 30 days, followed by 30 days, followed by 31 days. Enoch chapter 72, verse 19, begins in the autumn season, which again is 3 months long. This autumn season is showcased with the fall equinox. This autumn equinox is one of 2 days in the year where the lengths of day and night are equal. Verse 19 states, And the sun rises for 1:30 mornings on account of its sign. On that day, the day is equalized with the night and becomes equal length. And the sun rises from that portal and sets, and rises 30 mornings in the 3rd portal and sets. And on that day the night becomes longer than the day, till the 30th morning. And the sun rises from that 3rd portal and sets for 30 mornings. Enoch chapter 72, verse 25 begins with the winter season, 3 months long, 30 days, followed by 31 days. On the day of the winter solstice is also the longest night of the year. Verse 25 states, And the sun rises on that day from the 2nd portal and sets in the west, and returns to the 1st portal for 1:30 mornings, and sets in the 1st portal, and on that day the night becomes longer and amounts to double of the day. And the sun has therewith transversed the divisions of his orbit, and turns again on those divisions of his orbit and enters the portal 30 mornings, and sets. The sun returns of his orbit for 30 mornings, rising and setting. The book of Enoch, chapter 72, verse 31. Here we have returned again to spring, again to the spring equinox. The sun has made a full revolution around the earth. This is the return to the spring equinox, one of the 2 days in the year where the lengths of day and night are equal. Verse 31 states, And on that day the sun rises from that portal and sets, and rises in the 3rd portal for 1:30 mornings and sets. On that day, the night is equal to the day, and the year is exactly as to its days, 364. Book of Enoch, chapter 72, verse 35. And this is the law and the course of the sun and his return. Great luminary which is named the sun forever and ever, and his light is sevenfold brighter than that of the moon. But as regards size, they are both equal. Chapter 73. And after this law, I saw another law dealing with the moon. Her rising and setting change every month. Chapter 74. In 2 months, the sun sets with the sun in those 2 middle portals. Which 2 months? In the 1st and the 7th months. On the 2 equinoxes, the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, which announce the upcoming feasts. Because the 2 holy day seasons are spring and autumn. Spring being Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost, and autumn being trumpets, Day of Atonement, and tabernacles. The moon marks the beginning of each of the 2 feast seasons. Sirach, also known as Ecclesiasticus, chapter 43, verses 6 and 7. And the moon in all her season is for declaration of times and a sign of the world. From the moon is the sign of the festival day, a light that decreases in her perfection. Psalms 104 and 19. He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knoweth his going down. The moon serves as a second witness, announcing the upcoming feast seasons, twice a year. The moon does not mark each month. The sun marks each month, day, and year. Enoch 82. And now, my son Methuselah, all these things I am given thee books concerning all these. So preserve, my son Methuselah, the books, and deliver them to the generations of the world. I have given wisdom to thee and to thy children, that they may give it to their children for generations. And those who understand shall listen with the ear, that they may learn this wisdom, and it shall please those that eat thereof better than good food. Enoch 82, verse 4. Blessed are all the righteous. Blessed are all those who walk in the way of righteousness, and sin not as the sinners, in the reckoning of all their days, in which the sun traverses the heaven with the order of stars. And the year is completed in 364 days. And the account thereof is accurate, and the recorded reckoning thereof exact. For the luminaries and the months and the festivals and the years and the days has Uriel shown and revealed to me, to whom Yah of the whole creation of the world has subjected the host of heaven. Praise Yah. Have a blessed New Year.
And welcome to our show entitled Hear, O Israel. We'd like to thank you for tuning in tonight, and we're honored to be broadcasting remotely from the Cultural Center of the New Covenant Congregation of Israel. And I'm as equally honored to be sitting here with the elder priest of the New Covenant Congregation of Israel, Elder Yaakov Ben Israel. Elder, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for having us out tonight. Hear, O Israel, of course, is a show dedicated to proven world history through the words that's written into the Bible. And Elder, I haven't met anyone that can expound on those words as much as you have to enlighten the eyes of those who have been sitting in darkness. I'd like to talk to you tonight about two subjects. One, the Sabbath day and the feasts of Yahweh, since we are in the season of the feast of Yahweh. And then the second half of our show will be dedicated to the curse that was put upon the Hebrew Israelites, the 400-year captivity. I'd like to make a statement or share something with you from one of our publications entitled The Sabbath Switch, A Bow to Paganism. And it states, does it make any difference which day you worship Yahweh or when the Sabbath day really is? Of course, we in our own way worship every day. But does the Bible establish a day for us to worship? Is that day Saturday or Sunday, called the seventh day of the week or the first day of the week? Does Yahweh even set aside a day for his worship? Does the Bible answer these questions for man?
Of course.
Well, how are we all so confused?
Well, we're confused because of the doctrine of men that we received since the apostles died. What you have to do is go back in the beginning and pick up the history of what really took place. We taught the Europeans, Paul and the apostles, the Messiah sent them to teach the Europeans the way of life so that they could receive salvation. But what the Europeans did after Jerusalem fell, what the Europeans did was they actually took over because they had destroyed us and sold us to the Ethiopians to work in the mines. So they didn't have any teachers. So what they did was they took over, and the first thing that they did in 312 AD was change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. They said they didn't want to go to church the same day that we were going to, and when they first changed it, they didn't call it the Sabbath, they called it Resurrection Sunday. But now it's boiled down to be their Sabbath day. But to show you that Saturday is the Sabbath day, they celebrate a pagan holiday they call Easter every year. And the Bible tells you, because Christ rose on the first day of the week, which all the nations know to be Sunday. So the Bible said early in the morning on the first day of the week, they went to the sepulchre, and he had risen. Correct. So that was Sunday. But so what they did was this. They started going to church on Sunday instead of Saturday, as God has decreed. But there's nowhere written where God told them to change his holy days. As a matter of fact, he himself said, the Sabbath is a sign between me and the children of Israel. You shall know them because they keep my Sabbath. And when you get into the book of Acts, which is the first 30 years of the church, and read the book of Acts, Paul was always going into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and reasoning among the people. The early apostles kept the Sabbath, but it was the Europeans that changed it. It was the Europeans that is the Christians that has given us all of this paganism that we got to deal with today. So, but they began with the changing of the Sabbath. Then we know what happened. Then the Renaissance period came in, and they painted everybody lily white, and we got it all back lily white. So we believed those things simply because we had no one around that was doing the teaching to show them, so that we would do the research to find out that Christ was a black man. Although he wasn't an African, he was a black man, which shows that not only were the Hebrews black, the Africans black, but the Hebrews were black also. But the Europeans were the ones that changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday simply because they were starting them a new religion.
Well, let me back that up, because and this is a great article for our audience to go ahead and call us to order these articles, because if you don't look these things up, you will never know whether we're telling you the truth or not. And that's what you have to do. The scripture says, prove all things. And going into encyclopedia books and going into world history will truly prove that we're not just making this up. This is truly history. But according, as you were saying, the Sabbath Switch says, after the death of the apostles, the European converts removed the Jews' influence from their midst and began the practice of Sunday worship. In the early part of the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine issued a decree making Sunday a public festival throughout the Roman Empire. The day of the sun was reverenced by his pagan subjects, and it was the emperor's policy to unite the conflicting interests of the pagans and Christians. From the Council of Laodicea in AD 363, came this decree quoted from the Nicene and post-Nicene fathers. Christians must no longer Judaize by resting on the Sabbath day, but they must work on that day, rather honoring the sun's day. That tells you right then that they made this a public Roman decree that you must now work on the Sabbath day. And according to the Roman history, you were either killed if you were found worshiping on the Sabbath. So people had a choice to make. They either decided to live and began to keep the first day of the week, or die staying to the word of Yahweh. And there's not many that are willing to do this in this day and age.
Correct, and you have to understand another thing, too. When you get back in history, you find out that all of your pagan religions were spread with the sword, and the Christians did the same thing. They spread Christianity during the Crusades. This is when it's got its big spread. It was just like they did, the Muslims did with Islam. That was, the Arabs rather, that was spread with the sword. And the same thing with Christianity. What they had, the reason why they spread it with the sword was because people knew it was a lie. And they was trying to impose religion on people for control of those people. Let me read you something here out of Isaiah 24, and it'll help you understand why so many things are happening. Now remember, Yahweh has said that you shall know my people because they keep my Sabbath. Now, the first thing that Yahweh blessed and sanctified was the Sabbath day. Let me read something to you out of Isaiah 24. It says, verse 1, Behold, Yahweh makes the earth empty and make it waste, and turn it upside down, and scatters abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with his master, as with the maid, so with the mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the taker of usury, so with the giver of interest to him. In other words, this thing is going to affect everybody, right? When the reason why Yahweh is making the earth empty, right? Verse 3, the land shall be utterly empty and utterly spoiled, for Yahweh has spoken this word. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The hardy people of the earth do sigh. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore have the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell in are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. Why? Because they changed God's Sabbath. Then they tell us, well, look, we don't have to do what God say do anymore. All you have to do is live like you like to live, and you're going to be saved. Well, see, that's not what God said. There's going to be a judgment. And you're going to be judged according to the laws of God. Yahweh has the same, he must have the same principles to judge every person on the earth by. And the principle that he's going to use is his holy Sabbath. But what we read from Isaiah 24 was simply because man Yahweh knew that man was going to change this thing so that Satan would have an opportunity to run rampant upon the earth. Now remember, Christ said, the broad way lead to destruction. Christianity is the largest religion on the face of the earth, and Islam is right next to it.
Correct.
But when you get down into the nuts and bolts of it, the inner workings of it, none of them are valid, because there are too many contradictions with the things they're talking about as far as what our fathers, the prophets, had to say. They say you don't have to do this. God told our people, say, you're going to do it forever throughout your generations and all your dwellings. But man say, he didn't mean forever. Well, if he didn't mean forever about us doing that holy day, then maybe he don't mean forever about eternal life.
And then we would all be men and women.
Right, then we'd all might as well eat and drink and be merry, because tomorrow we're all going to die and go to hell.
Well, you made a good point, and you said that Christianity is the largest way. It is truly the largest religion on the face of the earth. And our motto is, if you are a Christian, you're a Catholic. And let me share with you another quote from the Sabbath Switch. And this is quoted from the Catholic Press in Sydney, Australia, and it's dated 1990 of August. Sunday is a Catholic institution, and its claim to observance can be defended only on Catholic principles. From beginning to end of Scripture, there is not a single passage that warrants the transfer of weekly public worship from the last day of the week to the first day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Catholic institution, yet we even see some Hebrews going to church on the first day of the week. We see some Muslims attending church on the first day of the week. We see all the Protestants attending church on the first day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
But yet this was a Catholic institution.
Mm-hmm.
Constantine worked in conjunction with the popes of Rome to make this again, the public thing that they changed.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to quote Luke in chapter 4, because this states that there's not a piece of scripture from beginning to end to prove this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to go back into Yeshua and his walk, because obviously if we're to be Christ-like, we should be following Christ as our example.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in Luke chapter 4, and I'm going to pick this up, just one verse, verse 16 and 17. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day
Mm-hmm.
and stood up for to read.
Mm-hmm.
And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah.
Mm-hmm.
And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written.
Mm-hmm.
He read out of the scriptures, which is what is now called the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what one is to do when they are gathered together in Holy Convention on the seventh day.
Mm-hmm.
Read aloud the
Mm-hmm.
scriptures of Yah.
Correct. Correct. You're absolutely right. See, the thing of it is like they tell me that Christ was a Christian. Christ was born King of the Jews. When he was born, the brothers that was returning back to Jerusalem because they had seen his star, and the prophets had told them that a star was going to rise out of Israel to mark his birth. When they came back to Jerusalem, they said, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" And let me read and see. They tell me Paul was also a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know that the Messiah died in the year of 33, right?
Correct.
Now, let me read something to you, and this is the year of 60 A.D.
Okay.
This is 27 years after he was resurrected. Now, they tell me Paul was a Christian, right? Well, let me read something to you here out of Acts 21st chapter.
Okay.
It says, and Paul was led into the castle. He said unto the chief captain, "May I speak unto you?" Who said, "Can you speak Greek? Are you not that Egyptian?" Isn't it strange that they thought Paul was an Ethiopian?
Very.
But yet and still what we
Egyptian.
see to him is what we see of Paul, the Europeans, right?
Mhm.
That was given to us during the Renaissance by the great
Turtles?
painters of that, the Ninja Turtles. That's what I like to call them, of that time. Verse 36. He said, "Are not you that Egyptians which before these days made an uproar and led it out into the wilderness 400 men that were murderers?" Paul said, "I am a man which am a Jew
Mhm.
of Tarsus." So
Right.
Paul, here it is, 37 years after Christ was resurrected from the dead,
Mhm.
and Paul is still called saying that he is a Jew. And see, a lot of people think the Jews are a race of people, but they're not. Judaism is a religion. It's a culture that was given to the people. It came from the tribe of Judah simply because the temple was built in Judah's land. But here, Christ was king of the Jews, and here it is, Paul was still calling himself a Jew, but what we get today is this, what the Europeans call them. See, in Acts 11 chapter, the Europeans began to call ourselves, our fathers, Christians. And that word stuck right on up with them, and here we are today. Christ himself said in St. John 4:22 that salvation is of the Jews.
Correct.
But they're going to tell me, say, well, no, it's not. Christ lied to you. Salvation is of the Christians. And they don't do anything. God said they changed the Sabbath day, the first thing, right?
Mhm.
Then Yahweh gave us a lot of other things to do that the church just don't do today because they say that we don't want to be like the Jews.
Mhm.
Well, they want to be Christ-like, don't you? Well, Christ was a Jew.
Correct. And you know, in Matthew chapter 5, I believe it is, Christ said explicitly that he didn't come to change the law or the prophets. He came to fulfill what was written of him in those books. The scriptures is the New Testament. When we read the letters that the brothers wrote after the death of Christ in the New Testament, these brothers quoted from the scriptures. That's all they had back then. When they talked about scripture, they had the Old Testament. So we have to read the Old Testament, the law and the prophets, to not only know about Christ and his coming, but a lot of other things that hasn't even happened yet.
Correct.
But getting back to the Sabbath, many Christians that I talk to will plainly admit that they say that they keep the 10 Commandments. But I don't think they know that the 4th commandment is keeping the Sabbath day.
Correct.
But also, Elder, this commandment is reiterated in Leviticus 23, and I'd like to go there and talk not only about this particular piece on the Sabbath, but the feast days as well.
Okay.
Since
Okay,
we're in
that'll
that
work.
season.
That'll work. That's a good place to go, simply because the people today, they don't keep these feast days, but Yahweh told us, our people, to keep those feast days forever. So what we'll do, let's read some of these days, and then what we'll do is we'll go into the New Testament and show that the apostles were still keeping these days during New Testament time.
Okay.
It was only when the Europeans took it over that all of the holy days and the law and everything was set aside so that they could put their gods up front. And when you look at what Christianity is all about, it's really all about sun worship.
Correct. Okay, Levi 23, would you like me to pick up?
Yeah, why don't you read that? Levi 23, and I think you ought to pick the Sabbath day as first and start at verse 1.
Verse 1. And Yahweh spoke unto Moshe, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, concerning the feast of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy conventions, even these are my Sabbaths. 6 days work shall be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest, and holy convention. You shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings. So that reiterates all that we've spoken about today about the Sabbath. In all your dwellings, regardless of where you are on the face of the earth, the 7th day, which we know is Saturday, is called Saturday today, is the day in which you should come together.
Right, it starts Friday sunset until Saturday, what they call Saturday sunset. But see, man don't want to deal with that simply because God said it. So what man is trying to do, man works for the adversary, the devil. This is why, if you notice, the churches aren't about your salvation anymore. The only thing the churches are about now is size and money.
That's right.
Simply because
the appearance of glory.
Right, they've taken God out of the picture, and they're using money as their God now.
Okay, verse 4. These are the feasts of Yahweh, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. Now, it's talking about the feast, and it says in their seasons. Tell us about the season we're in now, and what are the feasts that's coming up?
Well, the season that we're in now is coming to the ending of our agricultural year, in the beginning of our physical year. And the feast is coming up. Now, this is the season for the Feast of the Trumpets.
Okay.
Is for trumpets, and the Day of Atonement, which is the holiest day in the year, and also the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, when we read Zechariah 14 chapter, the Messiah, God said that the nation that don't come up in this kingdom, the nation that don't come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, the first year they're not going to get any rain. And if they don't come up the next year, then they're going to have the plague put on them. So it lets you know that these feast days, they're going to continue to be observed even once after the Messiah come and set up his kingdom on this earth. But see, they don't want to deal with these things, so they say, well, we ain't going to have to be bothered with that. We're going to be off in heaven.
Well, that's why I wanted to read this, because verse 4 clearly states, he said, these are my feasts. These are the feasts of Yahweh, not man's feast. But, you know, your neighbors, your relatives, your friends, they all want you to help them participate in the feasts of men. Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's Day, Easter, these are all man-made feasts.
Correct.
That if they will just go in and research the history, you'll find that not only are they man-made, they're man-made to worship mythological gods.
Correct.
And that's why you should not deal with man's feasts, but deal with Yah's feasts, because
Correct.
he wrote them down plainly and said, throughout the year, in all the seasons, you're going to have some times to be festive for my sake,
Correct.
for my glory's
Correct.
sake. So you mentioned the first one, and I'd like to take time to invite our audience out to the NCCI Cultural Center. And the Feast of the New Moon, which is also the Feast of Trumpets, will take place on September the 27th. That's a Wednesday night at even. And then the following day, which is September 28th, is the Sabbath. That is also a Sabbath. When you should take off from work, no work should be done on that day.
Correct.
Tell us how that day fits into prophecy, Elder, and how it fits in with the Messiah himself.
The Sabbath?
Yes, the Feast of Trumpets.
Well, the Feast of Trumpets, when you look at the trumpets, there's quite a few trumpets that's mentioned by the prophets. You have the 7 trumpets in Revelations, which brings destruction on the earth, and then announce the 7 vials that follows the 7 trumpets. Plus, you have the trumpets that the Messiah is going to blow to call together the assembly. In Numbers 10, people were told to make 2 trumpets for the calling of the assembly. And Isaiah told you that the Lord God is going to blow this trumpet, and he's going to be seen over them, and he's going to go forth and destroy the nations. But see, man don't want to deal with the destruction of the nations, so what man has camouflaged that with is that pie in the sky about going up to heaven. But nobody can show me in the Bible where it says that you are going to heaven. So when we look at these things, we can very well see that man has brought his thing upon the earth and just decided he was going to let God's stuff alone because he don't want to serve God. Man wants to serve himself of God. And to show you that man don't want to serve God, we know that God's name is Yahweh, right?
Correct.
But the average Christian, you ask what's his name, he don't know, but yet still he's telling me, well, God loves me and I love him and he's blessing me and he's doing this, and I pray to him, why don't you know his name?
And I talked to him just a few minutes ago, and he told me to tell you.
Well, I've been teaching his word for 25 years, and he come to me and said nothing yet.
Elder, we talked about the Feast of the Trumpets, and hopefully our audience will come out and join us on that evening. Truly, those who keep the laws of Yah are in festive array, and we're happy to be doing what thus saith Yahweh, because they're few and far in between. And this is, of course, the 7th day, the 7th month, the new moon of the 7th month. Now, the so-called Jews call this time of year the beginning of their year. Talk to us a little bit about that. How can it be the 7th month, and how do we know it's the 7th month, according to Scripture, and how can it be their first month?
Well, the reason why they got that as the beginning of the year is because it's not really the beginning of the year, but what our people did was they had part of the year that was the agricultural part of the year. And when that was over with, when they brought in the harvest and everything, then they began to sit down and make the plans of what was going to happen in the land for the next year, because the winter months was getting ready to come. They made the plans and things for the things that was going to happen next year. So what they did was this. They said, well, this is the ending of our agricultural year and the beginning of our physical year, our civil year, right? But see, what Esau did was this. Once Esau took our place, then he began to say, well, we got 2 first times of the year. See, we got the one that comes in April, and we got another first time. Well, that don't give you 12 months in a year. But people don't look at that. Only thing that people look at is the fact that, well, these are the Jews. And they don't do the research and find out that the Jews of the Old Testament and the New Testament were black. And they are in captivity today. And we know that the people in Israel today that's claiming to be the Jews have never been in captivity.
All right, you already talked about Christ and the association with him coming actually to destroy the nations with the Feast of Trumpets, which is a good reason why we should be still continuing to keep that feast. Let's talk about the Day of Atonement a little bit. What's going to happen on that day?
On the Day of Atonement?
When Christ returns.
On the Day of Atonement, we can read about that in the book of Zechariah and see about what's going to take place in Zechariah. I think it's in Zechariah 14th chapter. In Zechariah 14, it says, I'll pick this up at, you have to pick it up at verse 1 in order to really understand what's going on. It says, behold, the day of Yahweh coming, your spoil shall be divided in the midst of you. For I will gather all nations. Now, see, this is what people don't want you to know. People talk about going off to heaven and everything, not understanding that when the Messiah comes, the Messiah is coming here to put down all rule on this earth and set up a righteous governmental system so that man can be able to live in righteousness and in peace upon this earth. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall Yahweh go forth and fight against those nations as you fought in the day of battle. Now remember, when the Messiah left the earth, he left from the Mount of Olives. And the angel told the apostles, said, why do you stand gazing, you men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing into heaven? Say, the same way he left is the same way he's going to return with the clouds of heaven, right?
Correct.
Zechariah 14 and verse 4. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the north, west rather, and there shall be a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Okay, and verse 6. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be one day which shall be known unto Yahweh, not day or night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light, right? And verse 13 says, and it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from Yahweh shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one his hand on his neighbor, and his hand shall raise up against the hand of his neighbor. Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together in abundance, and so forth and so on. Okay, and verse 16 says, and it shall come to pass that every one that is left of the nations which come up against Jerusalem shall even go from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles, the first day and the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles are Sabbaths.
Correct.
So he's saying here that the nations are going to come up and keep the Feast of Tabernacles, right? Okay, now let me go down a little further here. It talks about this shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, right? This is the time, once the Messiah shows up to fight this war here, it's going to be a great mourning in the valley of Hadad Rimmon, in the valley where of Armageddon, right?
Correct.
And the mourning is going to be because of all of the bodies that's going to be slain, right? And the reason for the slaying of those bodies is because blood has to cover sin. Human blood has to cover sin. So Yahweh is going to kill off all those people to cover the sins of the people on the earth, so that a righteous government can be set in place, because sin has to be accounted for.
Correct. And you know, when you go back into the coming of the Lord in the Adonai, in Revelation chapter 19, it talks about the calling of the great birds of prey, so that they could come to the great sacrifice. And that's what the Day of Atonement is all about. This one-time sacrifice for, in this case, the children of Israel, to save them, correct?
Right. Now, Now, in Zechariah 12 here it says, in verse 10 it says, and I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. And they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourn for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn.
Correct.
That's the mourning right there. The Lord, the Messiah, was the sacrifice for the children of Israel. Like people say, well, he came to save the world. No, he didn't. He came to save the children of Israel. This is why he said, I'm not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And once our people received a word, then what happened was, after his death and resurrection, he sent our people out to teach the nations the word. But the nations, they wanted to hear it in the beginning, and they were obedient in the beginning. But then as time went on and we got out, they destroyed our people, then the Europeans began to add what they wanted to, like he was talking about. They tell me, my Bible tell me, said the angel went to Mary in the 6th month. And they're going to tell me Christ was born December 25th.
It was about 6 months premature.
Right. See? And they're going to, I look at Easter. The Messiah was resurrected on the 16th day of the month of April. Why don't they're going to celebrate that Easter thing, why don't they do it on the 16th day of the month of April? They don't do it on the 16th day unless it comes on a Sunday. Because Christianity is definitely sun worship, simply because Satan is the angel of the sun. That's why they don't do anything that God say. Can you imagine having any kind of governmental system or cooperation that don't have rules and regulations? But they're going to tell me God don't have any.
Well, you know, it's amazing that Christians, you see especially the ones that deal with prophecy, the Europeans that really deal with prophecies on their TV shows, they talk about Armageddon, they talk about these so-called Jews and how they are the chosen people, but the things that you've just read, it sounds to me that Christ is coming back to save his people, and they're going to be surrounded by all the other nations. Well, all the nations protect the so-called Jews today.
Correct.
Nobody can touch them because they are being sheltered. As the scripture says, they've set their nest among the stars. And the scriptures also call them the synagogue of Satan.
Right.
So the so-called Jews are in cahoots with the Christians to carry off this lie. But if Christ is truly coming back to the earth, and that city is going to be surrounded, it would have to be us that's there, that they're coming to kill off.
Correct, because they're not going to go up there to try to kill off the people that's up there that's called Edomites, simply because, like you said, the Christians protect the Edomites. As a matter of fact, remember when the war broke out over there in the Middle East and Iraq?
Mm-hmm.
You saw what they did right after the war. They gave Israel all of those Patriot missiles that the American taxpayer had paid for, right?
Mm-hmm.
To protect them not from Iraq but from Syria, because they know that Syria is the big power over there in that nation. And it's a known fact that the American government gave the Israelis $6 million a day. You know why? God told Abraham, "Blessed is he who blessed thee, and cursed is he who cursed thee." So they call themselves blessing God's chosen people. But what it is this: they're blessing imposters, and it's known that God's chosen people is in captivity. This is why the prophets say, "I'm coming to save my people out of captivity."
Correct.
And we're the only people I know on the earth that's been in captivity for the last 2,000 years.
And Elder, was speaking about those holy days in our captivity, Joel chapter 2 and Joel chapter 3 speak explicitly of the same scriptures that you read about in Zechariah, the coming of the Messiah to save his people when the heathen nations surround them, those who had sold them into captivity.
Right. It says, "Blow the trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm in my holy mountain."
Correct.
And it talks about the armies coming up towards Jerusalem, right? But the alarm, the trumpet of the alarm would sound, and Isaiah told you that Christ himself is going to blow that trumpet. He's going to blow that trumpet. Isaiah told our people, said it's going to come to pass that at that time a great trumpet shall be blown, and you shall be gathered one by one, O you children of Israel. The Messiah said, 2 people will be in the field, one will be taken and the other one left.
Correct.
2 will be in the room, one will be taken and the other one left. The saints is going to be taken, but they are not going to be taken up to no heaven. They're going to meet the Lord in the air, and Zechariah told you that he's coming back to the Mount of Olives.
Correct.
So as he's coming down to the earth, the dead is going to rise first and meet him in the air, and they're coming right back down to the earth, because the Messiah is coming here to free his people and take over this whole earth and set up the laws, statutes, and judgment that Yahweh issued out of his mouth, that he's coming to set that up on the earth.
Well, that sounds to me that keeping the Feast of Trumpets and keeping the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles is very important memorials, because it's talking about the return of Christ and reestablishing the earth in righteousness.
Right. Now, in Leviticus 23rd chapter, it mentioned the Feast of Pentecost, right? When the Holy Ghost was sent to our people, it was on the day of Pentecost, wasn't it? If they didn't have to keep the law, why would they gather together on the day of Pentecost?
Correct.
You see, the people always, the same law that you're reading about. Let me read something to you out of the book of Acts here.
Okay.
This is Acts chapter 12, and I'm going to pick this up at verse 1. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter. Then were the days of unleavened bread.
So they were keeping these days.
They were keeping the feast of unleavened bread. The Spirit came on Pentecost. Then we had unleavened bread, right? Okay. Let me
Paul
show.
also talked about fasting too, the day of fasting, which is the Day of Atonement.
Correct. Now this is in Acts. This is in Acts 13.
Okay.
I'm going to pick this up at verse 42. And when the Jews were gone out of the synagogue, the Gentiles besought that these words should be preached to them the next Sabbath day. See? The next Sabbath day. Now, we know this is in 45 A.D. This is in 312 after they changed it. So
Correct.
it's talking about Saturday, right? Now, when the congregation was broken up, many of the Jews and religious proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who spake to them, persuading them to continue in the grace of God. And the next Sabbath day came almost the whole city together to hear the word of God. So Paul was still observing. We read about unleavened bread. Then we read about the Sabbath day, right? Okay, let's read about another holy day that he was keeping back in Acts. This is in Acts 20 and verse 1. Okay. And after the uproar ceased, Paul called unto him the disciples and embraced them, and departed for to go to Macedonia. And when he had gone over those parts and had given them much exhortation, he came unto Greece. And there abode 3 months. And when the Jews laid in wait for him, he was made aware of it, and it saith to Syria, for he purposed to return to Macedonia. And there accompanied him different people, and so forth. And verse 6 says, and we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. See? Paul was still keeping those days. They waited until the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then they sailed away, right? Now, over here in the same chapter, in verse 21, it says, I guess it's verse 21, verse 16. It says, and Paul had determined to sail by Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hasted if it were possible for him to be in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost.
In other words, he hurried to get there.
He was hurrying to get back to Jerusalem. So the apostles were still keeping the holy days, and they were teaching the Europeans to keep the holy days. But once our holy city fell, and the Europeans took over. And once the Europeans took over, everything has been helter-skelter ever since. That's why they got so many different denominations. They can't get to lie together.
Wow, Elder, thank you for that narration of the feast days and the importance of the feast days. And again, come on out and join us on September the 27th at even. The Day of Atonement will begin at even on October the 6th. And also the Feast of Tabernacles will begin October 11th at sunset and October 18th at sunset. Come around 9 o'clock. We are Hebrew Israelites, so we're on CP time. We hate to admit it, but we are. So thank you very much, and we hope that you join us. Elder, you talked finally about us being destroyed and how the Europeans just took over everything because in 70 A.D., after the death of Christ, after the death of the apostles, the Hebrew Israelites really ceased to exist as a nation, which Christ told them about. He said, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its savor, where is it good? It's good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden down under the foot of men.
Correct.
And we know that according to history, and if anyone will pick up the book of Josephus, which was a Jewish historian that was on the Roman side writing the history of our people as we were being destroyed, talked about 1.5 million Hebrew Israelites killed off, how blood ran in the city like it was a river, and how the Romans, the Ark of Titus in Rome today, it commemorates the fall of our holy city, and how the rest of us, 97,000, were rounded up and finally sold back into Africa. We came out of Africa during the time of Egypt's reign. We were sold back into Africa to work in the mines of the Ethiopians, and this is documented history. So here we are, the Hebrew Israelites, back in this black land. Ultimately, Yahweh gave us a blessing and a curse. Let's talk a little bit about that curse and that final captivity that we suffered.
Okay, well, part of the beginning of the curse, was written in Isaiah chapter 6.
Okay.
That was where the curse began at, and this was something that is very important. What was told to our people in Isaiah chapter 6. In Isaiah chapter 6, in verse 9, it said, and he said, go and tell this people, hear you indeed, but understand not. See you indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand and with their heart, and convert, and be healed. Then said I, how long? And he answered, until the cities be waste without inhabitants, and the houses without man, and the land be utterly desolate. And Yahweh have removed man far away, and there be a great forsakening in the midst of the land. So we can very well see we had that curse of blindness on it, not being able to see the truth and to see what's going on around us, and not even being able to hear the truth. And you know how that works. You go and talk to somebody and read them something out of the scripture, you know what they say, but that's not what it means. That's the way you interpret it. I read that, wasn't no interpretation.
You know, what I found most interesting in my 18 years of being a Hebrew Israelite is that all the other nations want to be the Hebrew Israelites. All of them. I haven't seen not one nation yet where some small pocket of people are not claiming to be the Hebrew Israelites. But this curse is something that none of them want to deal with. You know, they want to deal with the blessings, but not the curse.
All of the nations, I was watching a special about 3 weeks ago. They got Chinese, Japanese talking about they some of the tribes.
They're the Israelites.
The Europeans, all the nations on the earth are claiming to be the Hebrews, right? Well, if all the nations are the Hebrews, then the Hebrews must be all the other nations. And that doesn't work too well, because we know that the Hebrews were black people, and they had some things that was going to happen to them. Let me read something to you out of the book of Hosea.
Okay.
And it shows you something. This is part of the curse that was going to fall upon our people. It's in Hosea chapter 3, and I'm going to start this at verse 4. It says, "For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, without a prince, without a sacrifice, without an image, without a ephod, and without a teraphim." See, in other words, the children of Israel would have no legal representation on the earth, right, with no king, right, no prince, right?
Correct.
We wouldn't have no churches of our own, meaning sacrifice and image and ephod, right, and teraphim. So what this tells me is that we would be serving the gods of the nations, and that's just what we do. All of the religions that we practice today, we got from other nations of people, and they can't verify their doctrine out of the same book that they teach. It's like these people talk about going to heaven, and I've often asked people, well, show me it in the Bible. Nobody can show it to me.
Elder, getting back to that slave trade, you made an interesting statement, because you can't show, people cannot show that they've been through a 400-year captivity. And the one thing about the Hebrews that was promised way back even to Abraham was that that lineage would go through a 400-year captivity in a strange land, and that it would be a horror, a great horror to them. Let's take our people back 400 years. What was the most significant event that was happening 400 years ago?
The slave trade.
Correct. We've got some pictures, and hopefully the camera can pan over these pictures. First, right there in the middle is one of the great ships that flew British flags, Portuguese flags, French flags, English flags, Spanish flags, sailing over the bodies of black Hebrew Israelites, whom they had purchased from the Africans. People don't understand that this was the biggest business in history. It was the greatest commerce that was in the land, and it was an international trade among the Arabs, the Edomites, the Africans, and the Europeans to sell these blacks. They weren't called Africans then, but they were called blacks to this new land.
Right, and the thing of it is this: we were the Hebrews were told specifically who they would be in captivity among. Hosea chapter 8 and verse 8, it says, "Israel is swallowed up. Now shall they be among the Gentiles as a vessel wherein is no pleasure." We were sold to the Gentiles as slaves, right? And we have been vessels of no pleasure. Nobody want to associate with us, right? We got a bunch of dirty names, a bunch of dirty titles and everything, and people just separate themselves from us, right? Simply because of what Yahweh has done to us. But he told us we would be slaves among the Europeans, right? And when the Africans sold us, didn't they sell us to the Europeans?
They absolutely did. And it is documented now that they didn't go over there and snatch as many blacks as they could. This was 15 to 20 million people came over here as slaves. This was an organized slave trade. There are pictures on this poster where you see people being trekked out of the hinterlands down to the west coast of Africa, where the slave forts were held, where these international flags flew over these forts, and as people brought their slaves down to be sold to them, they were held there until the next ship came from Europe that was bound to what is now called the New World, or the shores of the Americas. Let me share this with you. This is out of Deuteronomy 28, and if our audience would like to go and read about the blessings and the curses of the Hebrew Israelites, you'll have to admit to yourself, it only fits us. That's the sad and the glorious thing about it. Truly, the so-called Negro is down because we are living the curse to this day. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68 says, "And Yahweh shall bring you into bondage," or Egypt, "again by ships, by the way of I spoke unto you. You shall see it no more again. And there you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and for bondwomen, and no man shall buy you."
Correct. And what they did was they gave us names. Other folks like to name other people. The first, the Ethiopians named us Phalasha, which is a Cushite word for Indian residents, right? Then the Europeans call us blacks, niggers, and Negroes, right? Let me read something to you out of Psalms 83 here. It says, "Keep not silent, O Elohim, hold not your peace. Be not still, O God, for lo, your enemies make a tumult. And they that hate you have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against your people and consulted against your hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel be no more in remembrance."
And it truly isn't.
And it truly isn't. They don't call us Israelites no more.
No.
And when we tell each other, our own people, we're Israelites, they don't want to hear it.
And now that we've decided to have a little bit of, I guess, culture and education, we're still calling ourselves Africans, not understanding that the Africans even admit today that they truly sold these people into slavery. Listen to this. This is from one of the NCCI handouts called the Auction Block, and this is entitled "The Buying and Selling of Black Gold." It says, "One of the most powerful forces in the making of a slave was the slave trade itself. Dehumanizing from start to finish, the traffic in human lives was terrible at best and fatal at worst. Some historians estimate that from 1619, when the first blacks were brought to America, until 1808, when legal slave importation ended, 10 to 15 million slaves were imported and sold into all of the Americas during the transatlantic slave era. There was no lack of people eager to profit from the human misery of the cursed children of the Most High. They placed them upon auction blocks as if they were horses or cows and sold them to the highest bidder. Bones and muscles were flexed and tested. Penises and testicles were measured, and teeth were checked by potential owners. Parents and children were often sold to places so far away from each other they would never be reunited."
Correct. Breaking up the divide and conquer. Break up
Correct.
the family structure.
But is there anything in the scriptures that will prove this?
Sure, Deuteronomy 28th chapter. Deuteronomy 28th chapter will take care of that. But before we go to that, let me show you what they did here. And this is still in Psalms 43. Once they said, "Let us cut their name off, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name be in remembrance no more." In verse 12 it says, "Who said, let us take to ourselves the houses plural of God in possession." So they have taken all the houses of God and destroyed them and set Satan's churches throughout all the land. You don't see God's people represented any place on the land as far as major religion is concerned. As a matter of fact, they don't even want to let us come into the prison to talk to the people in prison. You know why? The two major religions got that all locked down. And here we come with the truth. They don't want the people to know no truth. That's what that's all about.
You know, it's sad because all of the races, regardless of where they come from, can tell them about their heritage. At least something. They at least know where they came from. We, knowing that Africa is a continent and there are countries in Africa bigger than the United States, we don't even know what country in the continent of Africa that we came from.
Of course
And that's
not.
because we've never claimed homage to Africa. It is not our motherland. It never has been. It's always been the name, which is what the name means, house of bondage to our people. Hopefully they've gotten a chance to scan over this poster board here that depicts some of the horrors of our people during the slave trade. And we've got some other posters that I'd like to get up as well. But are you done with that, Elder? We're going to go to 28, Deuteronomy 28?
Yeah.
Okay. Because we talked about us being sold as slaves So tell us a little bit about the auction block, where it talks about our daughters and sons being sold from us.
Okay, this is Deuteronomy 28, and I'm going to start. This is verse 32. Now, remember, we already had this curse of blindness. We wouldn't have no king, no prince, and no rulers of our own, right?
Okay.
And they would take over the house of God, so we wouldn't have no religion of our own, right? Okay, Deuteronomy 28 and verse 32 says, your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, and your eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in your hand. You just read about that, where they would break up families and divide them. Verse 36, Yahweh shall bring you and your king, which you shall set over you, unto a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known, and there shall you serve other gods, wood and stone. Well, America wasn't discovered by the Europeans at that time. When you check the Bible, our people did trade with the whole known world.
Correct.
And all the nations are mentioned except America. So this is the land that we will be brought to as strangers, right?
So-called New World.
Right. And you shall become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among the nations, whether Yahweh shall lead you. We read that we was going to be called by other names and so forth. It's going to cause our holy name to cease just a few minutes ago. You shall carry much seed out in the field, and you shall gather but little in, for the locusts shall eat it. Right now, we become sharecroppers. We work for the Europeans and turn right around and spend our money right back with the Europeans. So we can very well see we are carrying much seed out and bringing very little back in that we can keep and say that's our own. People are supposed to pay themselves first, right? Verse 48. Verse 41. You shall beget sons and daughters, but you shall not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. Verse
Now, if you'll pick up 48 for me, and then I'd like to get to some of these pictures over here.
48? 48. So therefore shall you serve your enemies, which Yahweh shall send against you in hunger, in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things, and he shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck until he have destroyed you.
Okay. Thank you very much. You talked about carrying out much seed, but bringing in very little. During the slave trade and during slavery, our people worked so hard to take care of and build up this country and to build the antebellum South that we killed ourselves, basically. We truly worked from sun up to sundown. There is one picture here I'd hope the camera can pick up where a woman and a man are actually acting as a mule and, you know, someone that's plowing behind the mule. I mean, they treated us like animals. I'd like to share this. This is in another one of our publications entitled Chattel Slavery, as they pan through those pictures. It says, the slavery endured by the Hebrew Israelites in Egypt was nothing in comparison to the slavery in the New World. The American chattel slave system has been the worst in human history to date. The slaves depended completely on their masters for food, clothing, and shelter. They worked from sun up until sundown, mostly in the fields. They planted, weed, hoed, chopped, and picked cotton all day long in the hot sun. This was an especially difficult and painful task since the field hands had to walk long rows of cotton bent over, trailing long bags filled with their harvest. Their needs were often met in substandard ways. Forced to live in inferior housing, most slaves were crowded in cruel shacks, each measuring 16 by 16. There was little furniture, and slaves slept on beds of rags and straw on top of a dirt floor. Food rations were distributed weekly, and slaves were poorly fed. Scraps from the pig, cornmeal, and sweet potatoes was the main diet for slaves. Many slaves wore no shoes and were clothed with items made from sackcloth, which is what we call burlap today, one of the roughest fabrics ever made. They were forbidden to read and write under a penalty of death. They were often called simply boy or girl or some other demeaning name. They could not even look into the eye of a white person. But Yahweh is truly righteous because he prophesied to us that if we didn't keep his law, all these things would happen to us, that we would be slaves to a foolish nation, which the Gentiles are the ones he's talking about.
You're absolutely correct. And when we look at the doctrine of the church today, we can very well see that the doctrine is foolishness itself. I mean, who can be foolish enough to believe that Yahweh won't have a judgment? And if he has a judgment, he has to have law to govern you by. And the thing of it is people just believe that he gonna judge your heart, like your heart is not a part of you. It's your heart that tell you that gets you off into all that paganism that people are off into, simply because they don't study the book. You go to church, you listen to the choir sing, the preacher preach, and then you go home. But you haven't learned the doctrine. Nobody knows about who we are. Nobody talks about who you are. But I think it's a reason for that. I think the reason is because the Messiah was a Hebrew Israelite. And nobody wants to tell us that the Messiah came from among our people. Because the next question is, then, well, if they're God's chosen people and the Messiah comes from among them, what are you doing with them in captivity? And if they don't have to keep that law, then they don't have no questions to ask.
Disagreeable.